episode 51 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 13th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself and my interview guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast is something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Carrie in Oklahoma, Gina in New York, Jennifer in Kentucky, and Tamiko in Texas. I also wanted to share some really fantastic news. Listener Jennifer in Georgia let me know this week that she received a $2,000 grant from Walmart. She applied on the same day she heard the recent episode Free Money and my episode with Amanda Jones. I strongly encourage you to not only listen but download the resource page. Even if you're not in a place right now to apply for grants, Amanda shares all of her tips and tricks for funding her library program, and it is really worth a listen. Last week's episode with Tiffany Whitehead ended with something of a plea. Should anyone like to share their strategies for expectations and procedures in the high school library, I would welcome the opportunity to record an episode together. I'm still hopeful that someone will reach out to the podcast. To high school librarians listening right now, think about what procedures you have in place for ensuring that your library is both a welcoming and a productive place for students to congregate. What steps did you take, and what would you suggest to high school librarians who want to support students and not police them? I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a sticker. And now, I am so excited to be sharing the conversation I had with boss librarian Casey Boyd. If I had to sum up how I feel in just one word, I would say inspired. I could have talked to Casey forever. Selfishly, I am so thankful that I have this podcast because it gives me the courage and the perfect excuse to impose myself on school librarians around the country and ask all sorts of questions. Listening to Casey gave me a great deal of understanding and perspective into her experiences as a school librarian. The conversation also caused me to reflect on our role in our students' lives, as well as the responsibility we have to the library program and the collection we create. Here is Casey Boyd. Listeners, I want to introduce you to somebody. I am so excited that we get to have this conversation. Her name is Casey Boyd, and I feel like I'm late coming to the party because, Casey, you have been on the cover of School Library Journal. You've been profiled. Listeners, I've included wonderful links in the show notes today, but I'm really excited to introduce you to Casey Boyd.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
Casey, I first found you, actually, you were someone who a friend recommended I speak to you. She said, oh my gosh, I have the best person you should interview for your podcast, and her name is Casey Boyd. So, of course, I started cyber stalking you, and you have a great deal to contribute to our profession, and I can't think of somebody who our listeners can benefit more from listening to. So, first of all, I looked at your Twitter biography, and I know that this is a great way to connect with your followers. Could we start off with you are originally from Chicago?
Yes, I was born in Chicago, raised in the suburbs, but I started my career with Chicago Public Schools, second generation Chicago Public Schools teacher. Both my parents worked for the district for years. So I started at a little elementary school on the south side in the West Englewood community, and then I morphed to East St. Louis, Illinois for 2 years, and then now I've landed in Washington, D.C.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to ask you in a few minutes a little bit about hashtag Good Trouble. I did notice you have hashtag Work Woke and hashtag Wakanda School Librarian, and I do love the idea of incorporating that into your Twitter bio.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to explain that because I'm a faith-driven person. And the hashtag Work Woke actually was created by political commentator, social activist Angela Rye. You see her on CNN and so forth. She's a commentator. But it's based off of scripture, 2 James 14 to 26. And work woke is all about attainable action. And how are you implementing and putting your knowledge to good use, in our case as librarians, that benefits our students and the communities that we serve. Because we know that faith without works is dead. So the only way you can demonstrate your faith to make a difference is to act upon it. So I try and just attain as much knowledge as I can. And in taking in that knowledge, I try to apply it and put it to good work in the end.
Well, I love that you put it in the context of your passion and in your workplace. I think that's fantastic. Am I correct that you are on the Newbery Committee?
I am on the Newbery Committee. It's an honor to serve, and it's a lot of reading. A lot of reading.
Be careful what you ask for.
Yes, definitely. But it's an honor, and I wouldn't take it away for nothing in the world. It's been a wonderful experience so far.
So, can I ask you what happens when you get tapped for the Newbery? How much advance notice do they have before a lot of this comes together?
It's almost like a 2.5-year commitment, because of course you're selected. You have to actually go through a election process through ALSC. And once you go through the election process, then there's a lot of meetings that take place. And, this is serious business. I understood that it was going to be very serious, but then once you start going through some meetings and trainings, you really see that this is really a big deal. So you must take it seriously, and it's not for the weak at heart, But I'm loving every minute of it, and I'm getting a lot of exposure to literature that oftentimes gets overlooked or it's not looked at very seriously. And, the committee that I'm working with is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Wow. So when all is said and done, you do get to go when the awards are given? Are you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
oh, yeah. You're there during midwinter when they make the announcement. And that's what we're all excited about, is that time when the honorary books, as well as the book that actually gets the top honor is identified. So we're excited, looking forward to that moment together as a committee.
Can you tell us this? Do you vote? Is any of this conducted remotely, or it's all done in meetings in advance?
Meetings. It's done in meetings. It's a lot of reading, and it's done in meetings. But so I don't want to talk too much about the process because it's through ALSC, and they're very strict guidelines. But it's definitely committee work.
Wow.
We have to work together as a committee.
That's absolutely, I mean, what a chance of a lifetime, right?
It is. It really is.
I noticed you are a library journal mover and shaker in the category of change agent.
I still can't believe that, but yeah, it did happen.
Oh, I can. I've read the articles about you. I can't, you're very deserving.
You know what? I just got busy and started working. I started working at Wendell Phillips Academy High School after unfortunately, my district library management position I shouldn't say management, but I was the area library coordinator. The position was closed out, and I had to return back to the schools. I was very fortunate. I was sent to a a high school. So it was my first high school experience, and it was a reconstituted high school where they dismissed all the staff except the custodian and the janitorial and the lunchroom staff, and they rehired everyone. Yeah, and that was a practice that Chicago Public Schools was doing for so long. It was crazy and ridiculous, but I was rehired in that respect. And I got to rebuild that library. And in rebuilding that library, I helped the school with rebuilding its image. Mm-hmm. It was second to last in the state it was second to last in scores for the state of Illinois consistently for years. And when Dr. Devon Horton took the school over, after Terrence Little, who was the first principal that served prior to him, one of the goals that they had in mind was that they really wanted to change the reputation, which was not good in the district at all. And I started doing that through social media. So I was using social media in very early onset in a school setting. And I think that's one of the reasons that attracted Library Journal to look at me a little harder and consider me for the Mover and Shaker Award, because we as a team at the school, we really worked hard to change the school's image, to show that we had great kids. The kids were doing a lot of interesting things, not just academically, also around technology. And of course, the school was a powerhouse in sports, so that always would help with anything. And that's pretty much what happened at Phillips. And that was a great run for 5 years.
And I think that the library is a great place to showcase all the students' academic achievements. And when you work with the kids in the library, it's sort of a great meeting place. And when you do put that on social media, it really is a wonderful way to promote this reading culture, which has become, I've been reading your articles, and your building of reading culture in your building has been really impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And it was, it really helps when you have a principal, or in my case, two principals that got it. They understood and they valued the library program. Terrence Little started with the funding base. I got a lot of money. And then Dr. Horton started a class. And when he found out that I had a background in broadcast television, he created a class that I was able to really hone all those skills and train kids and do a lot of technology-based activities that, we broadcasted everywhere, just to show off what the kids could do,
Were you collaborating with the teacher, or were you the instructor?
I was a co-instructor. I had a English teacher who had a similar background in journalism. So with us paired together, we had a class that met once a day, as opposed to this being a thing where we met after school or we grabbed kids when we had a sub in the building. It was a dedicated period. And it really did make a difference that the two of us are working together with these kids to produce a bi-monthly television show.
I love it. It's really key to not only have support from your administration, but that throwing money at it as well. Unfortunately, our libraries always look better when somebody recognizes money makes a difference.
Right.
Are you still getting your doctoral degree?
I am currently taking a break.
Yes. I was a little concerned, given how much you are taking on right now. I know that you have a long window to work on that. But can you give us an idea of your focus?
My focus is on street literature and how it's impacted the reading culture, students just gravitating back to leisure reading in the school library program. And so I'm kind of focusing on more high school.
Sure.
But now that I'm in middle school, I think I need to kind of change the focus. But I have been ill for a while, so I definitely had to take a break from the program. So I will be back, but right now, because I just opened a brand new library, it's taking a lot of my time.
I imagine
this year.
I did an episode a while ago about self-care and burning out.
Oh, yeah.
And I think recognizing that you reach a point at which you aren't any good to anybody if you push yourself too far. I think that's really important. Could I ask you about hashtag Good Trouble, because I recognize that immediately. Representative John Lewis and hashtag Good Trouble. Could you tell us about making good trouble in your library?
I first heard the phrase from Congressman John Lewis at a School Library Journal Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. And it was the same year that he published his book, March. Mm-hmm. And basically what he said is that when you see something that is wrong, unfair, or unjust, you have a moral obligation to stand up and speak up. And sometimes you have to get in the way. You have to make some noise by speaking up and speaking out against injustice and inaction. And that's what Good Trouble is all about. And you have to take a stand on things. And there have been times in my career where I had to take a stand on things. Sometimes it got me in a lot of trouble. But as a child, I was always getting into trouble. Okay, you ask my parents, my mother and my late father, they'll tell you in a minute, I was the worst of the three kids. But the thing is that when I heard him say that resonated with me, being a child that was always in trouble, that I could actually get into good trouble for good things, so I don't have a problem anymore with speaking up and speaking out. Sometimes it aggravates the sheer heck out of my principal. Mm-hmm. Not just my current one, but ones in the past as well, or my superintendent. They're like, "Oh God, here she comes again." But the thing is that I'm not fighting for me. I'm fighting for kids. I'm fighting for parents. I'm fighting for communities that we serve, and if that's what getting into good trouble is all about, then it is what it is.
I love that you're putting that all in the context of making sure you're always working towards your goals in your library and your library program. So mm-hmm. making good trouble when it comes to protecting your funding and making sure that your students have everything they deserve.
Yeah, I've experienced this where I had a principal very early on in my career came to me and said, things are very different now when it comes to grants, but he saw that I had $7,000 on the library line for grant money that I had not spent yet. And you and I both know in the spring, you order a lot of books because it's in preparation for the fall, mm-hmm. the next school year. And then in the spring, a lot of new books come out as well. So he tried to transfer that money to another line in the budget. Mm-hmm. And I really had to speak out. He was shocked that as a young librarian that I had enough, I guess, gumption to say, no, you're not doing this and this is illegal.
Right.
And that's exactly what I told him. And he was mad for weeks, but, I didn't care, because I looked at the bigger picture is that at that time, this particular school had not had a consistent librarian or library service. So the collection really needed a lot of work, so I was really trying to build that collection. And I'm like, oh, no, you're not going to do this to me. No.
Well,
no.
And I who can argue when you're trying to do the best thing for your collection? And sometimes it takes other librarians to appreciate how librarians spend their budget, because spending mm-hmm. it all in the fall doesn't make any sense. As exactly. you well know, oftentimes, especially when it comes to books, we're going to wait until after the award winners are announced at the end of January.
Exactly.
And
mm-hmm.
if you spend all your money in the fall, I mean, that you're sort of hamstrung at that point. You can't spend any more
right.
money. And, I'm sorry, but a lot of things get back ordered, and you always have to have some flexibility, and you want to be able to be responsive to the needs of your student.
Exactly.
I loved, you were quoted in an article you wrote in, I'll back up. In 2016, you wrote an article for School Library Journal. And friends, I'm going to include links to everything in the show notes. And you said, quote, "I learned a lesson early on when working with teen patrons. If you don't have a plan for your students, trust me, they will have a plan for you." And you included recommendations for working with reluctant readers. And I was wondering, that's a situation many of our listeners find themselves in, not just working in the high school, but working in the high school with students who aren't always excited to read. So could you give us a breakdown of what you found works best for you?
Well, it started with my late father giving me the best advice I could get when I first started teaching. He said, have knowledge of your subject matter, be patient, and have a sense of humor. So with that, it morphs into the 6-step model, which is, listen. Especially with my population of students, it's important that you just sit back and listen to the student. They're going to tell you what they're interested in. And that means that you can't interject so much what you think that they should be reading. Number 2 is just be patient. It's a process. Because number 3, you have to establish trust with these kids. A lot of these kids are coming from backgrounds and sometimes family units where trust is not the greatest thing that has been established with them. So it's going to take a little longer with you. Number 4 is, of course, keep listening to them, because as the trust continues to build, they will start talking more and more. From that, you're going to identify resources. That's number 5. What resources are out there that are based off of what the child is telling you that they're interested in. And of course, last, number 6, deliver and observe. Provide them with the materials, take a step back, encourage them that you're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't like the book or material that I'm recommending or I'm showing you. And if you don't like it, then we'll tweak it again. We'll try something else. And if not, then we're going to build. If you like it, we're going to build from it. So that's basically it. I
like the idea of the importance of building that relationship with your readers and also anticipating the long game. This is an investment that is going to take some time. I've been very lucky to work with students starting when they were 5. And by the time they're in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, we've known each other for years. And you really do
that's wonderful
with the trust. I mean, like you mentioned, they now trust you, and they really appreciate when you've made purchasing choices that reflect the interests that they have. And not only that, they feel special, and it helps with continuing that relationship and the trust.
I have a student that's in law school right now, but when I first met her, she was in pre-K. And I had her from pre-K through 1st grade. And I think after that point, I left and transferred to another school. And then years later, first year working at Wendell Phillips Academy High School, a young girl comes in and she's just looking at me and staring at me. And then she finally said, "Hey, did you ever work at Copernicus Elementary?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I was a librarian there." She said, "I thought I recognized you."
Oh.
And I had to think back, and that was little Jada, was always attentive during story time. And now, years later, she's quoted in that SLJ article, ironically. And now she's in law school, an adult and doing very well. And it just makes me feel so good when I see my students, they're thriving. Some of them are not college bound. They're in other, walks of life, and they're just doing well.
Right.
And I'm just so happy to see that. And that's that relationship that's been built. And it's funny because they will repeat certain things I used to say in class back to me, when I see them, when I'm home for the holidays. It's kind of embarrassing when my parents are my family is like, "You said that to that kid."
I do. I work in my community. I live in the community where I work. And so, handing out Halloween candy and seeing the kids at the store. And it really is important because they get to recognize, learn more about you as a person. And I think that helps them connect more. And
it really does.
And I really think it ultimately ties back to how your experience in the library is, because invariably these kids are the ones who are going to work with you and listen and cooperate. And I really appreciate that when it happens for me. I did want to ask you, because I caught this in one of your articles, about re-emergent readers. And that's a term I'd love for you to perhaps explain and talk about how you went about working with re-emergent readers when you were in Chicago.
And you know what? I don't know if that was a term that was already out there, and I just kind of, so I'm not claiming that term as my own,
Sure.
First of all, because I don't want to get in any trouble. But when I look at re-emergent readers and my former students, there's been a fear of teaching in certain communities in Chicago. And sometimes it's not just the community, but it's also teaching a certain group of students. And what I've learned is that these kids historically did not ever have, consistent library service provided by a certified librarian. So, and sadly, the school is devoid of books. So let's look at like two schools I worked at. One was Shoup was in a really middle class community, and then you had Copernicus that was straight up, technically in the hood. And if you have discretionary funds that's in the budget, normally a librarian can draw from some of those funds and get something, added into the collection book-wise. But if you're working at a school like Copernicus that's in a rough neighborhood and it's violent, those discretionary funds might be used instead for an extra scanner or a scanner wand, or I'm drawing a blank, but I think you kind of know where I'm kind of going with this. So these funds, they get eaten up, and so now you have these kids. I get them in high school, and in my case right now, elementary school, where they have not had consistent library service from kindergarten or pre-K through fifth grade, or in my case, in high school, pre-K through eighth grade, and they land in your library, and the English teachers are dragging them in, kicking and screaming. The kid is cursing you out. I'm not reading, da 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 da, and they're really hiding the fact is that their reading level is very low, and they're embarrassed by it. And so there we go with that 6-step model, trying to get kids to calm down. And you're like, look, I'm going to help you over this hump. I'm going to help you, improve your fluency, your reading comprehension, your vocabulary through reading. And it's getting them excited about reading all over again. And there's different genres of books. There's different materials that I've used in years past just to reach those kids. And it's interesting because I've had some unusual things that I've used to get kids, back into reading again. Origami was like the most interesting one I could think of off the top of my head.
Oh, sure. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, oftentimes you introduce a book about how to draw, or a book about, or even for me, it's cookbooks. They get very excited about cookbooks.
Yes, they do.
Because, and I said, the trick about cookbooks is you take a smartphone, take a picture of your recipe. So now not only do you have the recipe, but you have the list of ingredients for when you go to the store. And I think I have a lot of students who see this as an opportunity to get into the kitchen and do something with their families. And so I agree. Cookbooks, the origami books, and the how to draw books are oftentimes books, and joke books. If you do like the 818 joke books, because my students find those to be less intimidating because you're not committed to reading sequentially, that you can flip to the pages and read the jokes, and they like to share those with their friends. So it certainly do. It becomes a social thing, and it gives them an opportunity to show off the book they checked out.
Exactly. And that sharing is a big, big, big piece here, because I can remember when I was first introducing graphic novels and comics to my students, and I had ELA teachers fighting me hook and nail, angry. They're like, you're disrupting the process, Boyd, and I'm like, look, reading is reading.
I say that too. And reading is reading.
I mean, I've read some of those anime series. They're not the easiest to understand. They're quite complex, if anything, if you ask me. So for a child to really understand the storyline in some of those books, I say kudos to you. And it's also serving as a vehicle for them to really make some gains in terms of comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency. So, I reject all the argument. Same thing with street literature. Same thing. Folks were saying it's not a genre. It is.
Well, and that leads me to my next question, because you're right. When it comes to graphic novels, the value that has, especially for developing this visual literacy, which is not just it's an important way for kids to consume information. And oftentimes reading regular novels doesn't train you to do that at all. But in your school library journal, authored by Manaz Dar, titled Chicago Hope, High School Librarian Casey Boyd. Again, a link in the show notes. You mentioned incorporating street lit into your collection because, quote, if they read a story with characters in similar situations, that story sits with them much more than what I would ever say. Street lit feeds into the social and emotional issues my students are dealing with, end quote. And that's SEL. And that was, you said that in 2014, not 2018 or 2019. You were really ahead of your time when it came to developing your collection.
I was getting in a lot of trouble.
But good trouble. Hashtag good trouble.
Yes, I was getting in a lot of trouble for incorporating those titles in my high school collection. But what I will say is I have to give kudos to Dr. Vanessa Irvin, who is has written the Bible for street literature. And the book was called The Reader's Advisory Guide to Street Literature. She wrote it in 2011. And it really outlines street literature and its historical place in literature, American literature, and how it is a genre and is viable. I think for me, I just like public librarians were pushing the books, but for me to use it in a school setting, it was just so taboo when I was doing it. I was circulating those books under the table, but I had a lot of parents who are like, well, it's about real life issues. I want them to know. I don't want them to be blindsided. They were cautionary tales. A lot of boys and girls were checking those books out. There are a lot of popular authors at the time that were really resonating with the kids. And I just had a steady flow of kids coming in and checking out those books. And so when it was time for them to read the classics, I had one teacher that was very versed in street literature. She was making those connections. And it made it easier, like the kids read The Great Gatsby and they're like, you know what? This particular street literature book is reminding me a lot of that main character and how ruthless he was. I said, see, there you go. But I have to say street literature is defined as a literary genre. And the stories, they can be fiction or nonfiction. They're consistently set in urban and inner city communities. They depict tales about the daily lives of people living in lower income city neighborhoods. So you have Bluford series, which is a very popular series for middle school through high school. And then it ranges up to Nini Simone, which is a popular author. And then it can go up to also Kwan, who is an adult street lit author and male. And he has a huge catalog of books. And I had a lot of those books in my collection and the kids just ate them up, boys and girls. And some of them wanted the older ones like the Iceberg Slim and, oh my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. But right now it's like, there's a lot of like Man Child in the Promised Land. A lot of these books are from the 70s through the Black exploitation film time. And a lot of the films where they mimic the books and the books mimic the films,
Mm-hmm.
So the kids actually went back and they started requesting those books as well, Well, so they were readers. They were avid readers.
I see that when kids get excited about books, they become our best cheerleaders because they get their friends excited about the books. Oh, dude, when you're finished, I want to read that book. And so oftentimes my students will do a better job of exciting their friends about a book series than I do. And I'm not going to take it personally, but the kids literally hand the book from one to another because they get very excited about a series.
I had I think it was a blog post. It's called The Clear Book Bag. I think I did put a post on the Audacious Librarian. I have to really think back on that. But basically, because of the gun violence in the neighborhoods in Chicago, the kids have to carry a clear book bag in the building.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see in it at all times. And what the kids would do to show off which street lit book they were reading, they would push this book to the very back of the backpack. Mm-hmm. So when they're walking down the hallway, kids would see what they were reading. And sometimes they would lend the book out on their checked out book from the library, or some of them did it the right way, brought it back and then encouraged their friend to come and check it out. Half the time I only got a fourth of my collection back. So I was constantly ordering used copies from Amazon. It was a mess, but they were reading them and they liked the book so much they kept them.
Yeah.
And, that's the ultimate compliment.
Because it shows that not only did they read the book, but they embrace the book. And I love that you mentioned how the book is used as an accessory, as one would display. Because my students, when I teach elementary, they don't carry around backpacks, but they carry around their books very proudly. Like, look what I'm reading. And it does give them, especially a talking point. Kids can sometimes be so awkward around their peers, but a book is an easy way to spark conversation, especially if you feel awkward or you're meeting somebody or you're trying to reach out. But the fact that your kids were displaying their books in their backpacks like that, it really does speak to how important it was to them to their enjoying it as a reader. I feel silly asking, but it's clear you've been really successful in creating a strong sense of reading culture in your libraries. What advice would you give to librarians who find themselves in a school which really doesn't have a strong reading culture?
I would first say, listen to the students. The students are always going to be your guide, and they're going to drive a lot of the decisions that you make in your library program and also your collection. And when kids see that you're listening to them, a lot of that information gets translated back to parents. It can be casual during a drive to school, or around the kitchen table at night during dinner. The kids become your greatest advocate in really helping you develop that library program, and also defending it. Because in my case, when I had ELA teachers that were mad at me about the street literature books and they couldn't get the kids to read some of the required readings, the kids were very passionate in arguing that, hey, these books are really good. They are of value, and that you really, instead of just nitpicking at them, you really need to try and read one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think arguably parents, if they're feeling at all critical about the books that their children are reading, all it would take is giving them the book and saying, look, read it. See why your child enjoys this book so much. And it's very possible they'll realize that this is a good thing and they should let the kids continue to read.
Exactly.
You recently posted a blog on October 20th. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes, called Easy Like Sunday Morning. We've always done it that way. And I can assure you, many listeners have heard that said by somebody in the building administration. We've always done it this way.
Yeah, that gets a serious eye roll from me, because I've heard that so many times in my career. And what it translates to me is, it's translated to me as, we're afraid to do something different, strike out new, do it a different way. We don't know you that well, so we can't trust you. You're coming in here trying to change all this around.
Making good trouble. Yes.
Right. And I'm not saying that this is my current experience. I'm just saying that it's been over a period of 20 years, just hearing that, because I'm a very creative person, and I have a lot of ideas, that I really want to implement. And there's some that do well in some certain schools and certain administration, groups, and some that just don't, But the main thing is that I read a book years ago called "Who Moved My Cheese,"
Yes.
and this really falls into that category. Is that sometimes we have to strike out, we have to do things different because our kids are very different. These kids are very different from the kids I when I first started teaching. They're very different. They were different when I went to work in administration and then came back to the schools 6 years later. I noticed that the kids had changed on me. So we have to change and evolve with the times. We can't keep sticking with old practices because the kids have outgrown them.
Yeah.
They really have.
Can I ask, because it sounds like we have a somewhat similar background. I work in buildings where people have been in the same room for 20 to 30 years. Myself, the longest I've worked in a school is 7 years. I started teaching when I was 22 years old, and I will be 50 at some point in the near future. But the reality is that I haven't stayed in one place this whole time. And the good thing about relocating, in this case, I moved I changed districts when I changed my career. And so I have found myself being the new person in the building. And when I come to a building, I'm bringing new ideas. And I'm bringing with me all the things that hopefully worked in my previous building assignments. And you sometimes come up against individuals in my building, and when I say, "Oh, how long have you been here?" and they roll their eyes and they look at me and they say, "Forever." I was like, "Oh, sorry." I'm sorry I asked, because apparently forever is a very, in teacher terms, means basically my entire career. So, and, it does mean that we are far more, have the opportunity to be exposed to more and different ways of doing things, which might be successful. But until you try, you don't know.
Right. I've moved around a lot within CPS, and then the last couple of years, moving to 2 districts, and I have to be honest with you, I'm so tired of setting up libraries. I'm sick of it, I'm sick of it, but at the same time, it's like when it's done, I'm like, oh, this is just so pretty and it looks so great, so.
Sure. I heard an interview with you on edCircuit, and you talked about the importance of school librarians presenting at conferences which are attended by superintendents. I have never done that. I have attended conferences and presented to school librarians. But tell me what that's like when you're speaking to the movers and shakers of the district.
Well, honestly, I have not spoken at at a conference per se for superintendents or principals. That is an ultimate goal of mine. Yeah. I'm still trying to figure out my way in, but I've just really figured out in the last 2 years that this is a key. We got to get in there and show them what we do, because a lot of them have a lot of archaic views about it. But I've spoken at meetings within the district for principals and the superintendent. You really have to give your A. And what they listen to is statistics. And I'll have to share this link with you. But one of the things I did down in East St. Louis is build their library system. They had never had an electronic independent catalog. I think it was always through a local collaborative effort,
sure,
with the state. They never had one. So we got them a circulation system, their own catalog, scanned all the books in. It took forever because it was roughly 10 schools in that district. And the thing is that I just kept meticulous notes. At the end of the school year, I gave a presentation at the board meeting with the superintendent sitting there, and I went by school. Here are the number of checkouts. Here are the number of checkouts. And I added them up. It checked out to over 15,000 books checked out. They had never seen anything like that before. And honestly, they were kind of no, we need to see how you got these numbers. You know, I didn't take it personally, but when you've never seen something, oftentimes we as humans, we reject it or we question it.
Sure.
So I was patient because I knew that that was coming. And when they realized that, wow, the kids did check out all these books, and it's evident with the number of books that didn't come back,
right.
you know,
Yes.
so, because the kids liked them so much. So I just planted the seed there. It took 2 years to plant, and then I decided to move on, you know. But that is really important, is that providing that statistical data to your administration, whether they be school-based or if it's the community, you know, or either at the district level, they've got to see that, because that's that language that they talk all the time, is statistics. And in comparison to years past, that's the latest one. How do these numbers compare in the last 2 years? You know, that's okay. Let me go back in here and give you the numbers. I can run those numbers for you. Violet is very, very cooperative in that. Violet Destiny is very cooperative in that respect. And I couldn't read my numbers. Recently I had to call customer service and tell them, can you please run those numbers to make sure I'm correct on this? Because I was shocked.
Yeah.
You know, we had to say 3 weeks, we had those type of numbers. They were wonderful. You know, the library opening up. So, yeah. The statistics are great.
Well, I have to agree with you, because administrators do connect better with things that can be justified by data. And unfortunately, that's not my favorite way to function in my library, but it is compelling.
Yeah.
I've managed to earn grants for my library when I could prove that the average age of a certain part of my collection was so abysmal that throwing money at the problem seemed like the only thing that would quiet me and send me back to the library. I'll tell you what, I want you to go and enjoy your evening with your family. Can you tell us a little bit just where we can find you online, and if we'd like to follow you on Twitter? And like I said, I'll include links in the show notes as well.
You can look for me through the name Boss, BOSS_librarian, and I can be found primarily on Instagram. That's my real big playground. But I also have a Facebook page as well as a Twitter account. So I try and keep it as much as I can. You know, school related, but sometimes I get into a little social activism. So in your bio, if you're finding me, especially on Instagram, make sure that you say you're a librarian or reading specialist, because, you know, I just like to keep that. I like to friend people that are within the community.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
of reading. Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy evening to share with listeners, because it really is impressive when I read all of the things that you've accomplished, and it really does inspire a lot of listeners. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you. I actually spoke at to a group of young librarians that were just starting the field, and I discovered your podcast merely by accident, because I have an hour commute, and I was like, I know there is a podcast dedicated to library service, and that's how I found you.
Aww.
So I listened to a couple of your podcasts, and I was like, oh, I'm hooked, and you know, I saved it, and I've been recommending it to a lot of people. I'm like, look, there's a lot of good content that's on this podcast. You got to listen to it. So kudos and hats off to you as well, because you're doing an excellent job with them.
Oh, well, you're very, very kind, and I do appreciate it. So I will make sure that our listeners get to hear this conversation, and I do hope that our paths cross in the future.
Oh, they will. They will. You know, eventually they will.
Well, thank you, and have a great night.
Okay, thanks again. It's so nice to meet you finally.
I can't thank Casey enough for making this podcast possible. Shortly after we recorded, Casey shared with me her website, caseyboyd.com. I've included a link in the show notes. You really should take a look at the Teacher Resource tab. There is a wealth of links for teachers and school librarians alike. I would like to thank you for listening today. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. This week, listeners in the United States will be celebrating Thanksgiving. In the spirit of reflection and gratitude, I would like to thank the listeners and interview guests who have made this podcast what it is today. This podcast is very much a product of listener recommendations and feedback, as well as the generosity and the willingness of interview guests to share their time, their expertise, and their resources. Tara Thomas, who is our guest in the Future of Our Biography section episode, wrote me after listening to her episode. What she said to me has really resonated and motivated me more than she can ever know. She said, quote, "Amy, you truly have something special here," end quote. And she's right. This podcast is a platform to share ideas, support one another, and promote the best our profession has to offer. I am grateful to this listening community for this opportunity. I'm a better librarian and a person because of you. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. The topic of our next episode will be school-wide culture of reading, and my interview will be with Melissa Tom. I hope you will tune in.